feels like people are finally starting to realize the value of Luke Kornet to this Celtics team. He's been balling out, won that little third big man on the roster battle against Nimi. And now, all of a sudden, people are finally starting to realize just what he brings to the floor and why he's so valuable in the role that he plays. The Celtics are going to have a tough decision at the end of the season in terms of just locking him into a long-term deal. My name's Adam Taylor. I'm joined by my boy, Billy Calabrese, and we're going to look at why Luke Kornet is important to this Celtics team. What's good, Billy?
Hey. Luke, everybody's favorite bench guy, right?
Every Celtics fan's favorite bench guy, right? I mean, part of it's because he's corny, got the little celebration, you got the bowl celebration. These things I enjoy watching them. He stands out. He's a little bit corny. I know that there's some reasons why people like Nimi and the energy that he brings and the motor that he has and the size and physicality, but Luke's just a better player. Let's be straight up on this one. And I think that over the last 25 games, people are like, we're really starting to see the value that he brings.
It's the high basketball IQ that really makes him stand out. And yes, he's a little goofy. Yes, he's a little corny, corn dog.
Corny Cornet.
But exactly. And I do think that hurts him with a lot of casual fans because he doesn't look cool doing what he does. But what he does isn't cool. It's setting screens, it's boxing out, it's very high IQ basketball stuff that most people take for granted because it doesn't show up in a box score.
And that's the problem, right? Like, we as Celtics fans spent years defending Marcus Smart, saying what Marcus Smart does and the value he brings doesn't show up in a box score. We've spent years defending Al Horford with what Al Horford, before Al Horford developed the 3-point shot and became the floor spacer that he is. The argument was what Al does is in the seams. Everything he does is in the weeds. You can't track it really box score wise, but you know that value shows up because when he's in the rotation, you get additional wins. And if we're willing to do those arguments for top 8 rotation guys, starters, then you need to be willing to do it for somebody like Luke Kornet, because what he's doing right now in terms of short roll creation, screen creation, rebounding, offensive rebounding, playmaking, he's operating as a DHO hub. He's spacing the floor as a non-shooting big in the weak side slot. There's so many aspects to his game that he's bringing right now that are really hard to track. Obviously, you could track rebounds and screen assists and stuff, but the setting a screen and then going into a veer screen, the Varejao screens where you flip the angle, the Gortat screens where you're sealing guys off. Like, he's bringing so much versatility just in that screening game alone that you can't track that. You don't have a metric for tracking flowing from one screen to another, flipping an angle of a screen, sealing a guy off. These things don't get tracked, but he does them game in, game out, create space for everybody around him, despite the fact that he's seen as a non-shooting big, and brings value every time he's on the floor.
It's so funny because nobody will talk about him being like as a passing big man, but his decision making and his passing is one of like you could put him up against anybody. It's always quick, it's always the right play, it's fundamental, it's not flashy, but it is so just important to what we do, especially with those Tatum bench lineups. I mean, that's what gets Hauser open shots, that's what gets Pritchard open shots. And that's why that Tatum plus 4 bench guys lineup is our third most used and third most efficient lineup we play.
It's not just about the passing for me, it's the pace of decision making. So anyone that's watched my shows over the years, anyone that reads the newsletter, links in the description, by the way, go show some love, knows that I favor the 0.5 offensive mentality, which Joe Mazzulla leads into, which is like, yo, you've got 0.5 of a second to make a decision whether you're going to pass, dribble, or shoot. And you don't have to execute that decision within 0.5 seconds, but you have to know what you want. And Kornet epitomizes that. The amount of touch passes you get from Kornet on that short roll, he instantly knows what he's doing with the ball, instantly understands who's open, who's available. If he does need to hold on to the rock, he's understanding that there's going to be somebody coming off a pin down, somebody coming off a flare screen that he can initiate a DHO with, and he's just biding time, waiting for that action to unfold. Everything he does is methodical. Everything he does is a step ahead. And I think you mentioned it at the start of the show, that basketball IQ. That is one of the hardest things to quantify, but it's also one of the most important things to have, especially in a role player that understands that, hey, the value I bring is by the connectivity that I produce with everybody around me. I don't bring value as a scorer. I'm not really a rim runner despite my size. That value is I connect the dots and everybody flows better when I'm on the floor because the way I move creates space. I make people collapse because I'm 7 foot. So if I roll to the rim, you have to help. That's where he understands his role. He understands the assignment, and then the pace of the reads that he makes out of those are what elevates the entire team.
Yeah, and like I said, he probably doesn't have the best hands. That's why you don't see like him being kind of dominant on those like catches and putbacks or lobs, things like that. Even rebounding, he's not the best rebounder, but he's a very efficient one. He's great at boxing out. He's doing all the fundamental things. But what I think is his really strength is his rim protection because of his height, and he's so good in drop. We do a lot of drop coverage, and he's the perfect big for that.
Yeah, he contains the ball handler is what he does well. And I think that's a really key aspect to playing drop defense is your ability to contain a ball handler. So when you're playing drop, there's two main aspects to being a drop defender. One, contain the dribble. So when the guard or wing or the ball handler comes off that pick, you need to contain that dribble. You cannot allow the ball handler to get downhill towards the rim. But the other aspect of that is you're kind of splitting the difference between the ball handler and the rolling big man, because you need to be the guy to tag the roll to stop the big man getting into the paint. So understanding how to contain the ball handler's dribble while trusting yourself to tag the roll man at the same time and pick him up without giving up a lane to the rim. That's the difficulty in playing drop. That plus obviously you don't want to get pulled out onto the perimeter, put in a switch and then attack that way. Kornet does a really good job of kind of, I like to call it shuttling between the low help line and the high help line. So the low help line is just around where the rim is, directly out to the corners. And then the high help line is around the free throw line. And he kind of works in that painted area between the low and the high help line. And he shuttles really well, moves his feet great, has great hip mobility to be able to contain a ball handler and then flip, tag the roll man, box out, split two while you wait for the ball handler's defender to get back into the action, right? And it's really easy for that ball handling defender to get back in because players don't want to release a floater or try and shoot over Kornet because of the size. So now you have to wait for the roll man to get position. And he's just a really good pick and roll defender in general. And I know that was one of the big things that Brad Stevens spoke about him about 18 months ago, was just how good and how underrated Kornet is as a pick and roll defender. And for me, it's that ability to contain the dribble.
For me, it's doing all that without fouling.
Yeah.
It's what really separates him from Nimi is because he does all that without being a foul machine, which unfortunately Nimi has that Robert Williams first couple years disease where he jumps at everything. You'll rarely see Kornet jump and fall for these fakes. He'll stand his ground. He'll be straight up. He will use his body in a way that's not going to be a foul. And especially on setting screens, that's the other thing. I mean, Nimi is an illegal screen every screen he sets. You very rarely, if ever, see Kornet get called for an illegal pick or screen.
Do you want to know? I've just been searching this and I'll talk about his foul rate in a moment because I've got that up as well. But do you want to know a cool fact that I've just found out? According to Cleaning the Glass, Luke Kornet is part of Boston have 5 high usage lineups, right? And those 5 high usage lineups account for like 1,800 of their 5,000 possessions, which is a high amount considering the amount of rotation that you do. Kornet is part of 3 of those 5. In the 3 that he's in, the Celtics are plus 11.2 points per 100. This is versus like offensive points in versus defensive points out. So the highest usage lineup with Kornet is Peyton Pritchard, Jason Tatum, Sam Hauser, Horford, and Kornet. That's plus 11.2. They outscore teams by 11.2 points per 100. The next highest usage lineup that Kornet's in is Holiday, White, Brown, Tatum, Kornet, 143 possessions. They're outscoring teams by 8.5% per 100. And the next one is Pritchard, White, Tatum, Hauser, Kornet. They're outscoring teams in 101 possessions. They're outscoring teams by 28.8 points per 100 possessions. So when Kornet's in these rotations, one, they're winning possessions every time. He's not part, in terms of high usage lineups, he's not part of a losing lineup at all. They're all quite dominant. 2, the fact that he's in 3 of the 5 highest usage rotations this season tells you just how valuable he is. And part of that is because the Celtics don't like to send guys to the free throw line. And Kornet does, again, it's all down to his ability to contain and not foul, as you mentioned. And then it's also about his ability to operate on offensive end and not really have a high turnover rate. And the reason he does this is because most of his passes are either one pass away off the short roll or they're off a DHO. As you mentioned, he does have a little bit of butterfingers in terms of when he tries to keep the ball high, especially on putbacks and rebounds. But his defensive rebounding and his offensive rebounding rate are both actually quite good.
And that's all fundamentals. That's him positioning himself, boxing out. It's not by athleticism. It's not by anything that he's, like a freak athlete or anything. The other thing with him is he's a connector. You don't run plays for him, but he does things that sets up everybody else. He's always in the right position. And I'm not trying to keep banging on Nimi, but Nimi's never in the right spot. The spacing's never right. He just doesn't know. He's still learning. And that's something you'll never find with Kornet. And we've talked about it a lot, like who's going to replace Al Horford? Who's going to replace Al Horford? We talk about Kornet being the third big, but essentially that's just because we have a spoil of Richards with the Celtics roster. He's really the one of the strongest backup bigs in the league. If we say tier 1 backup big is like Naz Reid, he's tier 2. And there's not many guys in that tier 2 that are better than Kornet.
Nah, and I think that when you look at return on investment, so Cornet's on like a minimum deal, and you look at the return you're getting off that, he's one of the highest yielding return on investment backup players in the entire NBA. And I think that's a completely fair point to make in terms of what you're paying him versus what you're getting back. He's going to get paid this offseason. And finding a way to make sure it's the Celtics that pay him is going to be difficult based on all of the restrictions they've got. The Celtics do own his bird rights, so they can pay him whatever. But obviously, this tax bill needs to be kept at least in check somehow. But when you look at the value he brings and the importance he has to this rotation, I don't like the idea of potentially losing him because of everything that we spoke about so far. I think that it's very hard to find that value again. And not just that, if you look at where he was 3 or 4 years ago, where he was on the precipice of falling out of the league, he was bouncing in and out of the G League on 10 days, on 2 ways. And then the Celtics kind of pick him up, developing him in that system, bring him through, slowly developing him. Now he's such a core part of this rotation. I think that there's mutual admiration between Kornet and the franchise itself. So hopefully they can work on a deal that keeps him around. But he's definitely earned a bigger payday. I'm not saying he's going to be earning ridiculous money, obviously. But what I am saying is it's going to be a bump in pay, a bump in guaranteed years. And it should be the Celtics that keep him because Horford's getting older. He ain't going to be around much longer. And you're going to need a reliable big that can give you minutes as in a starting lineup or off the bench. And Kornet's proven that that can be him. And the fact that he doesn't play off athleticism, it's all off IQ and angles, is very similar to Horford. And that kind of tells you that he could have some longevity. So if you give him a 4-year deal and you're getting him into his mid-30s, you're not really worried about much of a drop-off because everything he does is based off skill rather than athleticism, where that drop-off is more pronounced.
Yeah, and not to get too nerdy into the weeds on contract stuff, but if Horford does come back, which I do think he is going to play as long as he can, health permitting, he's going to be a veteran minimum guy from here on out. So that's going to help things a lot. And with Kornet contract-wise, I think you lean something towards like what Peyton and Sam are getting, somewhere in that ballpark. But what I would do is I'm always a fan of descending contracts, front-loaded contracts. If we're going for the three-peat, knock on wood, I would like to have most of the money in the first year, then have it go down every year. So then you do have a very tradable contract down the line. And it also kind of gives you a little relief on the cap bill too. So you take the hit when you're contending. And then as time goes on, like it is, if it is a 3 to 4 year deal, maybe towards the end of the run, that hit isn't going to hit you so hard.
Yeah, I mean, however you need to structure it is fine with me. Do you think, if Horford signs a low deal and then you kind of want to make up that money by giving it to Kornet on the front end of this deal, then fine. I'm completely fine with that. I think that you just need to ensure that you're maintaining value. And again, a big part of all cap discussions is, are we getting a return on this investment? So you want to make sure that what you invest into keeping Kornet, you get a return on. You've got enough data now to understand what he brings to the team, his role, his importance. And then you make sure that the financials match up with the production, right? And I think the production is high, very, very high. I would be okay with that. I'd also be okay with like a 4 for 30, maybe like 7.5 a year, 4 for 20, like 5 a year. I don't know how you want to make this work. I'm not a cap guy. But I think that 5 to 7.5 million a year is a decent enough increase on salary to keep Kornet happy, and it's low enough and tradable enough to make sense for Boston.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little more in like the Wendell Carter Jr. range, and he's not another one on kind of like those descending contracts. It's going to start a little higher. It's probably going to start above what the mid-level exception is, but then it's going to go down over time, which it's not too crazy, but it's going to be probably in the 10 mil a year ballpark, at least for that first year.
And that's fine. Like, I think you're still getting a decent return on investment at 10 mil a year. You're getting a good return on investment regardless, because not only does he already know the system, he's proven. Like, if you look at the other guys that are in this rotation as bigs, like you traded for Tillman, it's taken Tillman ages to get up to a decent level in terms of understanding the rotation. He can't stick, he can't earn minutes. He's not beating out Luke Kornet right now. There's no point. Tillman is a massive depth piece that generally most fans are disappointed with. Nimi hasn't won this battle. He's more physically gifted. He's more athletic, has a higher motor, higher potential. He can't beat out Kornet because Kornet just plays at such a different level. So it's not just the return on investment in terms of production on the floor. It's the fact that it's very difficult to find a big that can slot into this system and make an impact, regardless of what role they play, because everything's so based on the way you move, the way you incorporate others into the play. And Cornet's style just fits what Joe Mazzulla asked these guys to do so perfectly. There's not many guys out there that are going to slot in like that at 5, 10, even 12 million a year that are going to have the level of impact that Kornet has. He's so important to this team. I think he's arguably the most underrated player on the Celtics, if not in the East. And that's a big statement.
And he's no longer a project. Like, this is him in his prime. This is the basketball player he is. And we developed that. So it just makes sense that we get to reap the benefits. I don't want to see him doing this on some other team.
No, and I don't think he would either. Like, one of the biggest points I try and point out all the time is situation and fit are very important for player success. And you can look directly over at Cleveland right now with Ty Jerome as a really good example of this. Ty Jerome was on the precipice of falling out of the NBA too. He's joined up with the Cavs. The Cavs have put him in a situation that's a really good situation for the way he plays, with the way they move the ball, the way they move off the ball, their screen actions and stuff. And then Ty Jerome fits with that rotation off the bench, and now he's having an MIP level season. That wouldn't happen if you put him on Phoenix or if you put him in LA with either of the LA teams. Situation and fit dictate success as much as talent do. And I think that Kornet's situation and his fit with what the Celtics do and how they ask him to play is a big reason why he's being so impactful and successful with this team. You take him out of that and put him on a team that doesn't run similar actions and they need a different style of impact from him. I don't think the value's there as much. And I think he understands that too, or at least I hope he does. But situation and fit are just as important. So hopefully he recognizes that and understands that his best place to be right now is in Boston, playing in a situation that he already knows he can thrive in.
One of the biggest advantages he has is his connection with Tatum. It's not that Tatum needs a security blanket or a safety net, but he kind of provides that for Tatum, because if the shot clock's winding down, it's kind of, you kind of need to make something out of nothing. It's a broken play. You know that Kornet can set that high screen. You're going to get the switch you need. You're going to get everything you want. And it's just so nice to have somebody have that like ESP connection with Tatum. That's going to basically give him more value to the Celtics than any other team.
It's all about trust, right? Like, for me, it's all about trust, and it's understanding that if you can trust a guy to make the right decision, you can trust a guy to make the right read and the right play, whether that's to take a shot, move the ball, do whatever it needs to be done, and you trust him to do that under pressure consistently, then all of a sudden you start building a two-man game. You start building an outlet for you where you can run that high screen, hit that pocket pass, and trust that Luke's going to make the right call. And you see this with Jaylen Brown as well. Jaylen Brown has guys who he has a higher pass rate to because he trusts them. He trusts them to make the right decision. And Kornet has built that trust between him, Tatum, him, and Brown. And now he's reaping the benefits. And I think that when you've got that partnership with Jason Tatum, who's one of the best passing forwards in the NBA, I said one of before anyone comes at me, you're always going to reap the rewards because Tatum's gravity is always going to force teams to send two. So then you can slip out of that. And now you're open to be able to make reads out of that. I think that a big part of Kornet's impact when on the floor with Tatum is the fact that Kornet has figured out how to play off of that gravity.
Yeah, I can't really just credit him enough for the player he was to the player he's become now.
Yeah.
He used to be like a three-point shooter, I guess then he had a shoulder injury. He was like a stretch five big, and the shot's never been the same since. I mean, that would just be just a crazy thing for him to add the 3-point at this
I don't think it
stage
would.
of the game.
I actually don't think it would. I think that, and I wrote about this. I did a mailbag on the Celtics Chronicle newsletter the other day. Again, links in the description. Go sign up. I did a mailbag about this, and somebody asked me about it, and I genuinely think that if Cornet started shooting threes, his overall value to this team would diminish. And that's because, very simply, his movement off the ball, in the way he screens, in the way he runs the short roll, that would all change. He wouldn't be that DHO hub anymore. He wouldn't be a roll man anymore, because you'd want him to be popping, pick and pop, we're going to go screen instead of like touch the screen and roll. We're not going to play up to touch as much when we're screening stuff. Up to touch, more of a defensive term. I kind of just threw that out there, but same thing. We're not going to play up on the shoulder of the screener as much to roll off him, because now he's a perimeter threat. He'd be more stationary. It'd be pick up, like, and we see this in the way Porzingis plays. We see this in the way a lot of stretch bigs plays. They're a lot more stationary. They screen and pop. They don't move as much, and that's where Cornet's value is in that movement, the way he rolls, the way he veers in and out of different screening actions, the way he runs into weave actions with DHOs. You had a 3-point shot, you lose a lot of what makes him an ideal fit. Now, the one guy that's really figured out how to make everything work is Naz Reid. But Luke Kornet's not Naz Reid. I think that adding that 3-point shot would actually be detrimental to the way he plays on this Celtics team. And I know that's counterintuitive, because the C's like to get up a lot of threes, but it's the fact that Kornet does something that's different to the other bigs on the rotation that makes him so valuable. If you ask him to just do what everybody else is doing, his value actually diminishes, in my opinion. So while him shooting threes would be nice, I actually think that it'll be detrimental.
Yeah, I don't want him just standing in the corner, but
Exactly.
it is interesting that he was able to get that out of his game. I mean, it wasn't his choice, obviously, because his shot seems restructured. It's a lot slower than if you watch those clips of when he was on the Knicks, when he was still shooting a lot of threes. So I do think a lot of it is, like I said, whatever happened with his shoulder is just not the same, but it's really worked out for him. It's going to get him a nice payday. I do think that like he can get a decent payday from us, and then he can kind of do the Luke Longley thing. Once our championship run's over, he could find a sucker team like the Knicks to pay him in his twilight years, when he's kind of on the decline, just off the recognition of like, hey, this is a 3 or 4 time NBA champion.
Yeah, and that's the value, right? And that's exactly what O'Shea Brissett kind of hoped for last season, was like, I can hit free agency as a champion and get a payday. And I think that one chip wasn't enough for that, because the overall perception of his value was quite low in general. I think Cornet's value and the perception of the way he plays has improved dramatically over the last 12 to 18 months. If he goes into negotiations this summer as a 2-time champion, he's going to get a big contract. If he wins another chip, or if he wins 2 or 3 chips between now and the end of the next deal, you are right. He can go into negotiations in his early 30s, early to mid 30s, and be like, yeah, I'm a 3-time champ. The value I bring to the locker room alone, along with the style of the team first style of play that I bring, is worthy of a decent payday. I think teams will go for that, especially young rebuilding teams that need that veteran kind of tone setter. Cornet will be that type of guy. So yeah, I think he's just ridiculously valuable right now. One of the most underrated players. I see why, and I've been beating this drum for a while. Shout out Bobby Manning from CLNS and Celtics blog as well. Dude's been in love with Cornet for a minute, so he's been on this train for a while. But I do think that overall, the value people are starting to see has been there all this time, but he's just refined it and refined it. And he's a key piece to this Celtics team, either going back to back, going 2 or 3, going 3 and 5. However many rings they win, I think Cornet's going to play a decently sized role.
It's unbelievable. I mean, he is probably, I mean, he's never going to get credit as Sam does and Pritchard does, but I mean, it's just such a great development story. And it just shows that time and time again how we develop players, our patience with them, how we put them through our system. And a lot of times it's ugly to start. Like,
Yeah.
how many people wanted Cornette gone? How many people wanted Sam gone? How many people wanted Pritchard gone? And it's like just the patience of Brad Stevens with this coaching staff. It's phenomenal.
And with that, I'm going to let everybody enjoy their day. Make sure you're showing love. Sign up to the Celtics Chronicle newsletter. Hit subscribe here. Leave a comment here. Go show love to Billy over on Letterboxd. We got our movie expert right here. Billy, where can they find you on Letterboxd?
CBO041. We're 6 days away from the Oscars, guys. Let's go. Let's get it. Watch the movies.
You know who else needs an Oscar? Luke Kornet. That's what we need. The Kornet Oscar. We got the Kornet contest. We need a cornoscopy. There we go. Kornet's out here giving cornoscopies. With that should be the title of the. If you're listening on the audio feed, the title's the cornoscopy. Right then, everybody, enjoy your day. We'll be back tomorrow.